Hi y'all, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to take you and show you an overview of the property and discuss some of the things that I discussed last week. If you did not watch that video, a lot of that will be recovered in this one, but from an overheads perspective, so I'd recommend you go back and watch the last video. Before we get started today, I want you to comment below what you're most excited about doing this year, because I've been dreaming for months about all these new things. It's not often a gardener gets to completely start over, and I'm really anxious for spring because I don't have a whole lot out there, and so it's going to be a lot to build out this year, which is what I'm going to be talking about here. I'll also be talking about some of the things in the future, some dreams I have of the property. That's going to be a multi-year process. So we're going to get started. I'm going to apologize in advance because I am not the best drawer. I'm going to use my iPad and do a screen recording for you so you can see it on the screen as we talk about some of these places. I may insert some footage from last week's video just to show you from the ground view what these areas look like. I also want to address some comments from last week's video that I got that I didn't necessarily respond to, and I was going to respond to them here. So I'm going to use Procreate for this. As I mentioned, I'm not the best drawer, and there's a reason I do a lot of my design that I've showed you in videos this year in Photoshop, because that's what I know. As a prior photographer, Photoshop is my favorite thing to use. So this is an overview of the property. As I mentioned on the last video, it's very rectangular. It's kind of cut off here in the back where that dry creek bed is in this area. And you can see the driveway comes up, and the house is more situated to the right side of the property if you're looking at it. Some of the things I discussed in the last video that I wanted to go over was water lines, and so a lot of the focus this year is going to be getting irrigation to various parts of the property, including the cut flower space, which is here, to this bed back here, and then I'll need to get flower to the roses here. So we'll just go over a bit of the spaces that I talked about in the last video. That includes this area here. So this is a satellite image. This is where the rose wall is going to go from heirloom roses. James Galway is what I've ordered there. It'll be 40 foot of roses, and so that'll be really exciting here on the edge of the property. And you should be able to see it from the road and other areas of the property in the driveway as you come up. Now, let me pull up some of these layers that I've done. So we've got the front flower bed. So this satellite image is from earlier, before we owned this property, from Google, basically. The drone I did not take up and get an overhead footage because I kind of wanted you to see what it looked like as we got it. So in this place, we've removed these trees. I've removed this tree, and I have added this flower bed right here, which I've drawn in for purposes of this video. So you can see here, as the flower bed currently exists, it goes pretty straight right here. I'm going to add this little loop in the spring. So this project is mostly done, but that project is going to be what I'm focusing on a lot this year. And then we have a septic field, which I've showed you in the last video, which means I can't plant a whole lot in these areas. This area is our primary septic now, and this is backup if it was to ever fail. Not something exclusively glorious to talk about, but if you are on septic, you know the requirements that you can't plant anything super invasive with an invasive root system over it. So this is a pretty substantial part of the property close to the house that I won't be able to necessarily develop with bigger things. The cut flower garden space is right here in the side of the property. I've got 60 by 40 foot laid out right now, and that's going to be a really big, nice growing space. And what I'm going to do, roses are going to be along here, and I'm going to talk about the cut flower space more in a coming video, but we're going to put perennials in this area and annuals here. So I can eventually double this group of roses, do maybe 3 layers of roses, and do the perennials here and move more perennials here at the end of the season when these annuals go out of bloom, or at the beginning of next season. As soon as I remove these tarps from this cut flower space, I'm going to add more tarps, probably a smaller one here, and here to extend the space. And then I'm going to let that kind of die down with grass and add mulch on it for planting next year. We'll see, I may be able to plant some stuff in fall there if I tarp that ground long enough and have enough mulch to cover it. One of the other priorities this year would maybe potentially be to develop some space along the property line here with some red twig and yellow twig dogwoods, as I mentioned, because that space is outside of the septic, and I actually have quite a bit of growing space on the corner here. This area will get enough sun to develop those things nicely, and that area is where I want to do cutting shrubs in the future. So I'm just going to overlay kind of a drone photo that I took of this space. Either it's kind of distorted because it was taken at a different angle, but you can kind of see this bed space that I've developed here this year. In the back is the pool area, annotated by that X there, and I'm going to be planting the hedge of Limelight Prime hydrangeas. I've already planted a hedge of them here along this fence line. And I think this is 8 to 10 right there, and then this other side will be 36 to 37. I have a big lilac here and a large banana that was developed locally here from 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, and it will grow pretty large and provide a nice kind of tropical vibe for the back area of the yard around the pool. I do have 2 hydrangeas planted here. Those are Quickfire Fab, which is a new variety out by Proven Winners. Those will be getting 5 to 8 foot tall. They're a bigger variety, but they're really interesting because they have almost like cross-shaped blooms, florets on all of the blooms, which will be super interesting. And I don't know that I'll get to it this year, but I would like to add a bed along the side of the pool. Now, I don't think this is going to be a bed of mulch. This will be probably a gravel related one, kind of to extend the edges of the patio a little bit, not necessarily to plant a lot of things in, but also just add some hardscape to the backyard, because right now all that's back there is basically concrete in the pool. So let's talk a little bit about water, which is going to be doing a ton of research right now, because at the prior home I had a sprinkler system installed. After we purchased the property, there was an existing one, but it had been installed before the subdivision had been developed, because we lived in one of the model homes and part of the lines ran on neighboring properties, and it was best to just completely start that over from scratch. And so that's what I did. Here, I'm going to focus more on doing that right the first time and build it out as I build beds. The front beds here will run off of the water system. So let me pull this up off the existing hose bibs. This is what I'm trying to indicate. This is where the water back here at the back of the barn. And just so you know, I call this a barn because it is truly a pole barn, but it is very much like a garage. So if you hear me refer to it as a barn and you're like, that doesn't look like a barn, it's technically, you know, a pole barn, but it is a very nice finished space and parts of it that I have my truck in and stuff like that. So basically we have our well, which is right here in the center of that space, which is really unfortunate. But there used to be our pressure tank for this house in the barn out there. So there's a pressure tank in the barn, but there's also a pressure tank in the house now. And the one in the barn has been abandoned, but I'm going to tap into it because it still works and run the irrigation to a lot of these beds this year. So you'll see I've got the blue line drawn. I'll need to update this and run water here to this roses. And then I've got the vegetable garden in this space, which I've showed you on video. Next is the south side of the barn, so it should get lots of nice light to grow some delicious vegetables for me. And then I need to run water to this backyard right now, and then the priority is getting it over to the cut flower space so I can grow lots of flowers this year. So there's not going to be a whole lot on that pressure tank this year. It's going to be all drip, no overspray irrigation. I will probably add some extra water hoses as well, just so I can have some mobile water if I need to hand water anything without drip, because that's one of the problems here too. There's only 3 hoses and none of them are on the back of the house. They're on the sides and the front. So getting water by hand where I need to will be difficult. I'm thinking about bringing one down here next to the pool just to be able to wash stuff off. I'll probably put one near the cut flower garden, and then maybe in the backyard near the vegetable garden in this area or something. So lots to do for getting water. Now, eventually, I don't know if it will happen this year, but a goal would be to get water down to the front of the driveway here. As you can see, this blue, because there's a planter down there. And this year I'm going to be planting 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗲 𝗦𝘂𝗯𝘀𝗰𝗿 and boogie woogie sedum in that planter, because it wouldn't need a whole lot of water and it should thrive kind of with our natural rain in that space. But eventually I'd like to put some beautiful annuals out there, and so getting water down there sometime this year, it may not be spring, is something I want to work on. Where that water is going to come from, I'm thinking about just tapping into an existing line on the side of the house, probably coming off of this one and just running one underground over and down to the yard or to the end of the driveway. I'm not sure how that'll work yet, and so that's not a super large priority on the list right now. But you can see I have hose bibs here, which are indicated by these little blue dots here and here. And these are the hose bibs, and I've got lines drawn out for the beds that they are feeding. So these are all drip irrigation systems in here. I need to get drip. I'll probably come off this one here to feed ferns I'm going to be hanging on the back patio this year. And then this hose bib controls all the water up front in this area. So lots to do as far as water and implementing systems where I can get water easily without having to drag barrels and that type thing around. Now, I've heard some questions on the video. One of them included a greenhouse. Was I looking at putting in a greenhouse? So greenhouses are and can be expensive. That is not the priority right now. And while I would love a greenhouse here in Ohio, if you're locally, you know, it's not incredibly realistic, in my opinion, to put a greenhouse in unless you're going to be heating it. We can have some very gray winters here, and it may be helpful to start seeds a little early, but I'm also I'm not a glass half full and I'm not a glass half empty. Let's sit down and see how much water is in this glass kind of person. And at this time, I don't know that it provides a whole lot of utility for me. A lot of people are installing greenhouses because they're beautiful, and I don't dispute that fact, but some people are doing it simply because it is a beautiful addition to their property, not necessarily because they're getting a whole lot of utility out of it. And myself, don't start a ton of seeds. I am starting fewer probably this year than I have in the past. I do have a bigger space in the barn that I can put stuff out there, but I do not have anything set up to actually heat any spaces in the barn for those cut flowers. So when I'm going to be starting them early, it's probably going to be like end of March, April, where it's not cold enough outside that I would have to heat any spaces inside the barn to keep those happy. But they would be protected enough from freezes that that wouldn't be a problem. Same thing goes with a greenhouse. There would probably be nothing that I would want to keep all winter here in a greenhouse that I would just have to heat. I would rather keep that in an insulated area of the barn if I had those things, and give them grow lights. So greenhouse probably in the future, and where I would probably place that would be on the side of the barn. Some people recommended that I put it on this side of the barn where the roses are, but that is the north side of this barn, and it's not going to get enough light obviously to grow seedlings in. So that is not an option. The option would be next to the vegetable garden, and so that's one reason I'm kind of delaying that space, so much development in that space this year, because I could eventually put a greenhouse in this area here, or, you know, next to the barn here and build it kind of as an attachment. So that's something in the future, but right now it's not necessarily a priority, and I don't think I would get that much utility out of it. So I want to focus on things that I would really just love to see plants. You know, I can spend much more money on plants that a greenhouse would cost. In the future, I would like to have a small orchard somewhere. I tried to grow varieties at my last home. I picked all of those varieties out locally, and I had a lot of issues with our late frosts here killing the flowers or the blooms and not getting fruit off of them. So I'm going to have to strategically find some varieties that are late to bloom here in Southwest Ohio that I can reliably get fruit off of. Because if you've been following my channel, you know 2 years ago I cut down all of those fruit trees that I had at the last house because they were basically useless. They weren't productive. And if you're going to have trees, fruit trees that are not being productive, there's no reason to have them, right? So I want to do some fruit trees, some blueberry bushes. I actually may start on some like small fruiting things this year, some blueberries, raspberries, that type thing that take a while to get going. Because those are the things, if you're going to put on your property, you should put a lot of focus in up front because they do take a while to get developed and start producing well for you. I'd eventually like to add some nut trees as well, like pecans, and it is pecans for you people from Georgia who say pecan. I will fight you over it. But I would like to have like a pecan tree. My grandmother and grandfather always had pecans when I was little, and I would eat them as fast as my grandmother would crack them. And I just love various nut trees, and so where those are going to go on the property, I'm not specifically sure yet. My neighbor does have a pecan tree, which made me really excited, and it's just kind of out in his backyard and does really well. So that's good news for this area that we can grow things like that pretty successfully. One thing I have not discussed on the channel, as we were on the topic of kind of greenhouses, is a high tunnel. This is projected, and I would like to get this going by next year. If not, I would like to get it by the end of the year and put it up in spring. And I would put that behind the barn here in this area. This area has a lot of space back here, but it's shaded by the barn because how you're looking at this on the screen is east to west, so it's kind of flipped. And so the barn will block some sun during the day. This back area here where the high tunnel would get sufficient sun to be full sun or classified as full sun. But in the evening, it's also blocked off by all of these trees in the back. Now let's zoom out a little bit. Something else I would like to have on this property, and I've always kind of enjoyed it, is a small lavender. We'll just call it a patch. I don't want a huge field of lavender. Lavender's nice because it can take some heat and some dryness, and so I can put that necessarily out and let it develop on into a space where it does not need an extreme amount of irrigation like some of these other annual cut flowers that I'm going to be growing. So in the future, a lavender patch somewhere would be really nice. I also want to implement, like I did at the last house right before I moved this past year, some southern magnolias. And so I'm thinking about eventually this tree right here is going to come out. I hate cutting down trees, but this is a pine that was placed really poorly. It leaks sap during the summer and it will get on people's cars if they park under it. And it's kind of placed and growing kind of funny, and I don't want it falling or damaging the house in future years. So I would like to place a southern magnolia somewhere in this space. Southern magnolias here don't get extremely large, and so it'll be smaller than that pine and also bring some of that southern flair to this garden. So the southern magnolia we grow up here primarily is Bracken's Brown Beauty, which is a smaller variety that is pretty columnar and narrow. There's another variety called Edith Vogue that gets much bigger. It doesn't have quite the beautiful brown back of the leaves like the Bracken's Brown Beauty has. And so I like the Bracken's Brown because you can use it in decorations in the fall, create wreaths with it, and other beautiful things like that. I would also like to, once I get water down to the end of the driveway, place a magnolia on either side of the front of the driveway or front of the property on either side, and I think it would be a really beautiful statement piece as you come into the property. Speaking of the driveway in general, eventually I would like to line the driveway with trees, and I think that is several years out in the future. Like I said, we got to focus on getting water to where it needs to be, but I think I can start some of these smaller trees. I've already planted a couple. Here you can see at the front here we have a red point maple in both of these areas. Those are small maples that do really well here, and I've got them lined out so they'll not interfere with items getting down the driveway, and I would like to continue that on either side all the way down. Now you see some of these other evergreens we have here. Those look fine right here in the middle. They're really beautiful and quite a statement. Were planted a long time ago. but I think I can implement some things strategically down here, spaced out so they look nice as well. We've got the crab apples here, which I think are eventually going to have to be removed. They look pretty rough. I'm going to give them the spring to see how they bloom for me. But crab apples can sometimes be around here kind of insect disease ridden tree that does not do very well, and there's actually quite a few. There's also this big one in the back of the house here. There's one here that also does not look very great, so in the future I may have to remove some of those crab apples and replace them with things that do much better here. A good alternative are red buds. They do really well here and they bloom for you in the spring. But I think there are some crab apples out there that are more resistant to diseases these days. That might be a good option to put in place for those crab apples or elsewhere on the property for some beauty. Now going forward, some other things I want to do is I want to develop some beds around these trees that are shade beds. Something I did not have at the last house very much of was a whole lot of shade. I was on 1/3 of an acre. There was one tree planted on the property. When we purchased it, I planted 3 or 4 more, but they never got to a size where I could really plant a whole lot of shade items under there. And I love a shade garden. It's one of my favorite things. It's very interesting when you see one because you can juxtapose a lot of different textures and colors and foliages and blooms, things that bloom in shade like epimediums, and hostas even bloom in shade, 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, and really make some really lovely and beautiful shade gardens. And so one of the issues would be obviously getting water to them. So that's why that's such a big focus this year, because planting shade gardens under trees that are such established can be a little difficult. We're going to see how I can get that done, but there's also some development I want to do up here next to the driveway as far as some beautiful, like I think I want to do some 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 hydrangeas somewhere on the property, hedge those. I had them at the last house. They did really well. They'll get more sun in this location, and I think they'll stand up even more upright than they did at the other property. But lots of things to think about this year. And so you can see as I'm dreaming about these spaces, there's a lot planned, and it's going to be a lot to tackle, and it's going to take several years, I'm sure. One thing about me is I think I have a lot of projects to do in the spring, and then I always end up get them tackled pretty quickly in May, and then I'm like, well, I don't have any more other projects, and I have to come up with more ones for the fall. So we'll see how much I get done. Sometimes it's just about acquiring all of the materials you need to get a project done and have them ready to do the project. I know when I start anything that involves some type of plumbing like this water is going to do, it's going to be trips and trips back and forth to the hardware store as I find pieces of things I need. And so I'm trying to put together a material list and be very architectural about this and write down everything that I might need and envisioning in my head, future-proofing, allowing the system to be blown out easily, while also being, resistant to freeze in the barn and having to provide heat necessarily in the winter, growing seeds in the barn, providing a little heat there. So there's a lot of moving parts to this new garden and growing on a scale that I would like to while still keeping it manageable. In conclusion, as I mentioned, just want to know what y'all are doing this year. Maybe you have a completely full garden like my last garden was becoming, and there's not a whole lot you can do other than pick out a few plants. Maybe you've purchased a new property. I've heard from several of you who have purchased new properties recently, and you're in the same boat that I am, trying to decide what to do at this new property. Or maybe you're just here to sit and listen and watch and learn. And I thank you for joining along with me. And remember, be a light. Take care.